Hello, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar. We'll be starting in just a moment, so please stand by. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. Thank you.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. My name is Yokarditi Rocha. I am the Executive Director of the CLIO Institute. We're very excited to be bringing you another wonderful webinar. And today we're going to be going through a climate change journey through time. But first of all, before we start, I wanted to give you a little bit of a brief explanation for those of you who don't know the CLIO Institute. The CLIO Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that for over a decade has been working to build climate literacy, advocacy, and engagement for climate action in the state of Florida. We're really, all our information is science vetted by the most known organizations in the world, some of which you are seeing here in your screens. We work with a top-bottom, bottom-top approach. We work with local municipalities and state elected officials, but at the same time, we work with the most underserved communities that are impacted the most by our changing climate. And that's what brings us here today to talk about probably the biggest crisis humanity has ever faced. And some of you probably think about the current pandemic and health crisis we're experiencing. But we're going to be talking about a lurking bigger crisis that has already starting to make its effects in our communities, especially here in our state of Florida. So before we begin, I wanted just to make sure for those of you who may not be so climate savvy that there is climate scientific consensus that the Earth climate is warming because of human impacts. We're seeing an enormous buildup of heat trapping gases in our atmosphere. Our atmosphere is really what makes conducive life in our planet, and excess amount of greenhouse gases, heat trapping gases like carbon dioxide, methane, water vapor, nitrous oxide, fluorinated gases are really warming our planet. This is the latest scientific reading from NOAA, from the Atmospheric Mauna Loa Laboratory in Hawaii. And the latest reading for March was that we were at around 414 parts per million of CO2 in our atmosphere. And if you compare just the last year's reading, you can see a significant increase, as you see in the graphs below, either per year cumulative or by mean levels on the last 4 years plotted in these graphs. We are going to be talking as we go in that voyage in time, the different kind of levels of greenhouse gases our atmospheres have seen, hundreds of thousands of years before. Scientists have been very have been with quite precision able to really take good readings of the amount of greenhouse gases, particularly CO2 in this case, hundreds of thousands of years before today. As you can see in the graph on your screens, the red line talks about CO2 variation. You can see the lines the red lines going up and down, where we never surpass the limit of 300 parts per million. And at the same time, you see the white line correspondingly really directly to the increase of CO2 levels. As CO2 levels goes up, you see the temperature also going up. And as I mentioned in the latest readings, we are right now at 414 parts per million, which is about here, if you can see on the top right corner of your screens. And this is pretty much the amount of increase we have seen in the last century. And we have seen an increase of temperatures almost of up to a degree Celsius. But I don't want to get too much into those kind of nitty-gritty scientific variables and scientific information. I want to bring up to the fact that as we face this current pandemic, we're seeing governments mobilize to save people's lives by listening to the science. And the alarm to respond to the climate crisis has been sounded many, many years ago. 2 years ago, we had several scientific communities and organizations sounding out the alarm to really put forward climate robust action plans to try to really curb the increase of our global temperatures underneath 2 degrees. The ideal would be to curb the increase up to 1.5 degrees, but 2 degrees seems more likely the way, or even more the way, if we continue business as usual. We are in ground zero for sea level rise and other climate related impacts here in Florida. Florida cities are most at risk for our changing climate. And while we are all coping in many different ways of how to deal with the corona pandemic and the corona crisis, one cannot forget that they are, or at least acknowledge the similar parallels we're seeing from one to the other. I think the biggest takeaway of this is delaying response really puts at risk people's life. Really ignoring science and delaying response puts people's lives at risk. And the other one is that sometimes facing some economic sacrifices could really save people's life, as we have seen with some of the economic slowdowns that we have seen in many parts of the world that are bringing tremendous environmental benefits across the world. So you can see this. It's a picture actually from India before the shutdown, and this was right after the shutdown, right after the global shutdown. We're seeing levels of pollutions go down in different parts of the world, as we have seen in China and India and Italy and many parts. Even here in the US, we are seeing levels of air pollution go down because of our current pandemic response. Now, this is not the utopic scenario that we want to get at to reverse our, the climate crisis. But what it is showing us that there are some important correlations and parallels. Recent research has shown us that there is a correlation between air pollution in many cities and higher coronavirus death rates. We are seeing many higher deaths at cities with low air quality. And unfortunately for us here in the US, our air quality has significantly gotten worse. Just last week, the American Lung Association released its State of the Air report, basically stating that we are seeing decline in our air quality in many of our US cities. So, there are some silver linings. There are some good news to report, some of which are, health groups are calling Congress and our federal government to tackle climate in current and future stimulus package and relief aids. I think this is a great breakthrough, because as we're listening to scientists to cope with the pandemic, scientists are also calling for climate action because it benefits public health and saves people's life. We're seeing, some renewable energy thriving, like wind just top coal in production in the last few months. We're seeing investments go up in companies that are decreasing their carbon footprint, and some some groups calling for putting a price on pollution and putting a price on carbon. So with that, what I really want to kind of close to say is that, just last week, we celebrated Earth Day's 50th anniversary. 50 years ago, people came together in this country from all, sorts of walks of life. People from the left, people from the right, decided to come together to tackle pollution. This Earth Day was the movement and the protest around it was what brought us the creation of the Environmental Protection Act, the creation of the Clean Air Act, and also the Water Act, and many other legislative protections that were enacted because of Earth Day. And that was 50 years ago. Now, today, we are faced with the same protection agency that was founded to protect us 50 years ago. We are seeing an environmental protection agency that is deregulating and suspending environmental protections that protect people's lives, that protect our water, that protect our air, and that protect our climate. We cannot let the last 50 years of those environmental protections, go about. We cannot lose those protections. Those protections are saving people's life. And as we are seeing a decline on our air quality, we're seeing how we are losing many more people because of this respiratory pandemic in many parts of our country. So, I think that with that, I want to close saying that, history has taught us many lessons. And it is my hope, but with this pandemic, we can really take these lessons and we apply them for us to plan for a more, clean, just and resilient future. I like to close with this quote because it resonates really well with some of the things that we're gonna hear now. But we cannot repeat our past mistakes. 50 years ago, we created agencies and protections to protect our lives and our people, our water, and our climate. We cannot go back. Those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So with that, I want to turn on to our guest speaker, who's going to take us through that climate change voyage through time, Dr. Gray Reed. Dr. Gray Reed is a professor from Florida International University, where she teaches history and theory of architecture. She has written a book, a digital book, out of frustration to try to understand the climate issues we face. And I'm going to let her continue introducing herself and tell us a little bit about her love of maps and what we're going to be learning from this wonderful presentation today. Dr. Gray? Dr. Reed, can you hear us? You can share your screen now.
Okay, I just wanted to say hello. How are you? I am a professor at FIU, and welcome to our voyage through time. And I just want to say thank you to Cleo and to Yoka in particular for booking this flight. So I will share my screen at this point, and we're on our way. Let me see. There, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So the first thing I want to engage is this idea of time scale. That is, how do you think about where we are now? And we think about, you know, what we're going to do today, or what we're going to do next week, or maybe we're thinking months ahead. Okay, you know, I'm planning for the fall now. And maybe we think a little bit longer, that historians certainly think in terms of decades or even centuries. And I teach history at FIU, and my frustration was that the time scale at which I was teaching was way too short to engage the issues of climate change. So my question for you is, at what time scale can we talk about climate change? You know, is this an issue of months? Is it an issue of years or decades? And the information that we get from scientists, they'll, like one of the charts that Yoka showed, talk about hundreds of thousands of years. Oh, okay. You know, maybe it's hundreds of millions of years. I don't really know. So I wrote this book as a way of putting some of that perspective into order, so that we can look at climate change from a series of different timescales, from the timescale of a single year, to decades, to centuries, to millennia, to hundreds of thousands of years. So I'll take you on that little walk. We start in the present, and really the issue of climate change is that we can't see it, that we can't see the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We don't see the source of our energy, you know, unless of course you live in like the cancer corridor in Baton Rouge, when you really do see it. We also don't see so much how we use energy. So this image shows the electromagnetic waves that are emitted by our cell phones and radio towers and so forth. That is a form of energy. It tremendously affects our lives, but we don't see it. What we do see are the effects of climate change. And I'm not talking about our grandchildren here. I'm talking about us, that we are seeing droughts that dry up the crops. And we're seeing torrential rains that wash away those same crops and that flood our cities. That here's a map showing areas of drought and areas of increased rainfall as a result of climate change. Now, if you look in particular, you can see my cursor there, that right here in Central America, There's been a drought that's been going on for a couple of decades now. And that means that the farmers there simply can't do what they've done for generations and grow crops. And that's what's been driving them north into the US. And some of my students at FIU have been talking with some of these farm workers and beginning to understand the real dilemma that they face. At the same time, there's increased rain here in the Mississippi Valley. And that means that the Mississippi River has been flooding, and we've seen it. You know, North Dakota, flooding in the spring. So these are the effects that we see. At the same time, we have tremendous potential to generate all the energy that we could ever use from renewable sources. So this is a map that shows the areas that are prime for giving us solar energy, and areas up here in the north that can give us wind energy. And this little square right here is the area of solar panels that we need to fuel the entire planet. So just to give you a sense of perspective of what we see and feel and where we are. And oh, by the way, I forgot to say in the beginning that all of this, or most of what I'm going to show you now, is available on the web at climatex10.net. And that little link will turn up in the end. So where are we? Now, here are some numbers that are important to us. Human population, there we are. We're close to 8 billion people on this planet right now. That's a number to keep in mind. Atmospheric concentration, Yoka spoke about that. We're at about 415, goes up and down a bit during the year, 415 parts per million. That is the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And it's a tremendously small percentage, 415 parts per million. That means that if it goes up a little bit, it's a big percentage of the amount that is in the atmosphere. That's important because it means that we have that when we emit carbon dioxide, it makes a difference in the total concentration. Okay, temperature average. Here we are. This is global temperature average, 14.9 degrees Celsius, and it's rising by about 0.1 degree per year. Yeah, that's a lot, actually, when you think about it. Sea level rise, that's also coming up. It's accelerating now. It's come up about 8 inches since 1900, but whew, you know, we're on the way. Okay, so these numbers are sort of fixed there. But if we walk back 10 years, we can see where they come from. So we can see there's the rise in population. You know, we're going up about 1 billion people in 10 years. I mean, oof. And then the CO2, we can see it go up and down over the years, over the course of the year. So it's gone up a good bit over just 10 years. And 10 years is like not that long. Global temperature average, it's gone up about 1/4 degree over that period, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it adds up. And sea level gone up, it's actually gone up about, what is it, about 4 inches over the course of, it's gone up about 2 inches since 2010. In Miami, actually, it's gone up about 5 inches, and that's because the Gulf Stream has been slowing down. So our local sea level rise is different than the global sea level rise. So keep an eye on these numbers. We're going to track these back as we move back. So decades. What do we think about and what do we do at the scale of decades? Well, infrastructure. Certainly, infrastructure takes decades to plan. It takes more decades to build. These are the systems that make and that use energy. So that means we can't change instantly, although we've changed pretty instantly for this coronavirus. But the planning that we need to do now needs to look ahead at that scale of decades so that we can plan for change. And when they say we've only got a few years to address climate change, it means we have 0 years to address climate change, because we need to be planning and building now. So it takes decades then for our effect on the environment to be felt. So we can see that we've been chewing away decade by decade at the forests, that the soil depletion and the challenge to the habitats has been building over decades. That's the scale at which we see that kind of change. So here we are, 10 years. Okay, let's shift timescales now. And let's go back 100 years and start thinking about things in terms of centuries. So here we are, 10 years. Yep. Watch those numbers compress. There we are. This is where the numbers are then at at the scale of 100 years ago. We can see the population like zoom up from almost 2 billion to almost 8 billion, you know, 4 times. In 100 years, the population has increased. CO2 concentration, it's gone from about close to 3 to close to 4. That's a like 25% change. That's huge. And global temperature has gone up, about a degree and 1.3 degrees. That's a lot. That has changed really the way that habitats can operate in the climate. We've seen habitats kind of climbing up the mountains, trying to get to someplace a little bit cooler. Sea level has gone up from about that 8 inches that I was talking about, that has since 1900. Okay, 100 years ago. Well, 100 years ago, it was really the time when they were shifting from animal and human power to fossil fuels. What a transformation. It was incredible. It means that power, that this coal and oil can light the city, that it can make vehicles go, that it can do my work for me. It was an incredible transformation that just liberated people from, lifetimes of drudgery. That this coal and oil also lit the cities and made them safe for people to come out at night. The coal threw ash into the air, and the lights as they at night would reflect off of that ash in these amazing colors of sort of orange and purple. And you can even imagine what color that was. I remember being in Philadelphia and seeing the lights reflecting off of the air pollution that we had there, saying, well, what color really is that? I don't really know. So 100 years ago, here's the forests again, a global map, and you can see that the Amazon is now whole. 100 years ago, the Amazon was a solid ecosystem mass. The northern forests were also much healthier, even though we had deforested. And in the East Coast, actually, there was tremendous deforestation around 1900, 1920. We can also see the population in Europe, the United States, India, and China. So we get a sense of sort of our trajectory at this point over 100 years. So there are numbers, 100 years. So we're going to zoom back again. Ready? There we go, 1,000 years ago. And over this time span, we can see the Black Death. Okay, there's a little chink in the population curve. And we can, these are the hockey stick graphs. that we often see in climate presentations that show that that the CO2 has been going on pretty steady for a long time, and then whoop, it goes up. It goes up in recent years. Or the temperature chart, it depends on the scale that you look at it, but yes, it's been going up in a kind of a very sudden way at the end, and sea level rise. Of course, this is at the scale of centimeters, so it's so you can see it. 1,000 years ago, where were we? Well, the Islamic world was really the intellectual soul, and they were fascinated with machines, things that could move by themselves. They revived ancient wisdom about water-powered devices and mechanisms, and mostly they used them as toys. This is an automaton that was described in about 850 AD in a book published in what is now Iran, in Baghdad. And it shows a flute that played by an automaton that is the air that comes out of this water-driven machine then runs through the flute. The same water then powers essentially a music box to lift the stops on the flute. So it was this marvelous toy. They hadn't yet really put them to work for for industrial purposes, but the sense that machines could run on their own was fantastic. Here we were. This is the land under cultivation, and the population. Now you can see the difference in population. It was much lower at this point. So here we are. Population. Let me see. 275 million, less than a million at this point. So here we are. We're going to walk back again. Boink. Oops. There we go. We compress the numbers. And here we are at 10,000 years ago. Now this was the end of the last ice age. And this 10,000 years really encompasses all of human civilization. We've got Egypt, we've got Rome, we've got the classical age of Greece just lined up here. And we can see that the sea level was actually fairly steady through all of that time. At the end of the last ice age was really the invention of agriculture. Now, in order to invent agriculture, they had to organize people. And people needed to share a belief system so that they could all work collectively towards a collective good. So this is a temple that was built 10,000 BC. And it was built before agriculture was widespread at all. So the belief system came first. The organization of people came first. Then there was agriculture. And then after that was animal husbandry. So this is a map showing where animals were domesticated. The pig over here in China, and chickens. Well, we're still getting chickens from China. Horses up there in the north, and goats and camels and llamas over here in the New World. At the same time, actually a little previous, that many of the large mammals in the world went extinct. And there's some debate in the scientific community whether it was from climate change or whether it was from hunting or some combination. And here's an extinct Neanderthal human. But essentially that the way that we relate to animals and habitat was changing in a dramatic way over these years. So animals became for our service rather than sort of out there in the field. And I think the belief system also to change from an idea of living within nature to an idea that we have dominion over the earth, that we can change the face of the earth to feed us, was a remarkable shift. So here we are, 10,000 years ago. Okay, we're going to zoom back again. Here we are at 100,000 years ago. Oh my. We can see the entire ice age. And we see also here how the carbon dioxide concentration, remember that's the black line, the temperature, which is the yellow line, and the sea level, which is the blue line, how they all track together, that they move in unison. And that's not for nothing that I'm sure it's been explained to you that carbon dioxide actually holds the heat from the sun and the earth, so that more carbon dioxide means that temperatures are higher, less carbon dioxide means that temperatures are lower. And in fact, when it gets warmer, the ice in the north melts and raises the sea level. This is what we're facing now. But look at this, through the ice age, we've gotten down below 200 parts per million. Look where that puts the temperature, 8 degrees, that's frigid. There was a point here where humans almost went extinct because it was so bloody cold. And sea level down 120 to 130 meters. You know, it's just extraordinary that everything that we consider our sort of continental shelf was exposed at that point as land. So where were we? Well, humans were dispersing throughout the planet. And here's a timeline starting about 200,000 years ago, first in Africa. And then as they made about 40,000 years ago, they really started crossing over into Europe and from there and into Asia. And of course, eventually into the New World. So they were on the move, and before humans, Homo sapiens, there had been Neanderthals before them and Homo erectus before them. So here we are, 10,000 years ago. We're going to zoom back again. Here we are at 1 million years ago. Now this scale down here, these are hundreds of thousands of years. So we can see this is our most recent ice age, and we can see the ice age beyond that, before that, and before that, and we can see the ice ages come and go. And we can see the correspondence between the CO2 concentration, temperature and sea level. So what happened was that the animals in their habitats, that change was slow enough that the animals and their habitats would simply move north, and then they move south, and then they move north again. And that the ice ages are structured such that the descent into the cold is rather slow. And then the rise out of the cold, the warming is much more rapid. So we were adapted. We're actually kind of an ice age creature. That, you know, it's why we can live in Chicago, I guess. So here we are, 1 million years ago. We're going to walk back again. 10 million years ago. Oh my, this was the last time, about 5 million years ago was the last time that carbon dioxide concentration was at the level it is today. 415 parts per million, there it is. What was the world like then? Well, it was 2 to 3 degrees warmer, and that's what we're trying to hold it to. That's our goal at this point, is to hold temperature to 2 degrees, and even 2 degrees is quite a lot. Sea level was 10 to 20 meters higher. Well, bye-bye Miami. It was a different world. The world was warmer, it was wetter. Most of the world was forested. And I think of the African forest, that the kind of intelligence shared across the creatures of the forest, that the parrots were smart and the elephants were smart and all of the primates were smart. And you had to be smart to compete in this world, that you had to know where the fruit was going to appear, and you had to organize your band, and you had to get there in order to get that fruit before the parrots got it ahead of you. So I think of this kind of evolutionary soup in which our intelligence evolved. So we think about that time, 10 million years ago, when humans weren't really here yet, and yet the drives that kind of made us who we are were formed in this world. So we move back again, 10 million years. All right, go to 100 million years. Oh, good heavens, the CO2 is just out of here. So it's way higher than anything we can even imagine at this point. Global temperatures up to 27 degrees. You know, you can't even, like, an oven doesn't quite do it. The sea level was a high of 120 to 140 meters. That's, I mean, it's hard to even imagine. It's climbing up the mountains at this point. So what was that world like? That world was very, very different than what we have now. That was a world that we are really not built to live in. It was a world where the carbon dioxide concentration was much higher. And it was a moment in evolutionary change when plants were beginning to create nectar and pollen, and animals were learning that they could drink that pollen, and plants could drink the nectar, and plants took advantage of the fact that the animals could transport their pollen to another plant. It was a coevolution of plants and animals at a fairly, you know, basic level. But I think the point here is that we weren't built to live here. It's not our world. So we go back again, 100 million years, zooming back, zooming back again. Oops, here we go. Okay, so at this point, this is what the world looked like 100 million years ago. And I've put in here the location of the current oil fields, so you can see that they were formed, or they existed in those shallow seas. You can see that most of the central US was underwater at this point, that all of the Middle East was underwater, that you know, here the Amazon was underwater, and that's where the current oil fields are. So we're going to zoom back again, 100 million years. Here we go to 1 billion years ago. Whoa. This is, we see the evolution of life itself on the planet. And we move from the end of the snowball Earth period, where the Earth was just a frozen mass in the sky, to the Cambrian explosion of multicellular, and this essentially is algae, through the evolution of a whole suite of plants, an extinction with climate change, evolution again, an extinction, evolution, an extinction. The 5 extinctions, the most recent being when the asteroid hit the planet and wiped out the dinosaurs. We are now in the 6th great extinction that is caused by human-driven climate change. So what was the world like 1 billion years ago? This is what it looked like. This is Rodinia. It's even before Pangea. The oceans open and close at the scale of 200 million years. So we are at the scale of the formation and the movement of plates around the planet. Much of the land mass was in the southern hemisphere. Now it's in the northern hemisphere. It was a world of oceans that were filled with the biggest algae bloom that you can possibly imagine. And remember that the the carbon dioxide concentration is just out the roof. So these are plants in the oceans that evolved to absorb that carbon dioxide and to give off oxygen. And over hundreds of millions of years, they changed the atmosphere. And they brought the level of carbon dioxide down. They brought the level of oxygen up. And as they died, their little bodies made of carbon would float down to the bottom of the sea. And there they formed huge deposits of carbon. And it's those deposits of carbon right there, petroleum, that we are now digging up and releasing back into our atmosphere. That is the timescale of climate change. What about the future? Well, we're going to lose a lot of cities. We're going to lose cities either to too much heat, this is Dubai, or too much water, Miami, or too little water. And they say that South Africa now is, they got very close to sort of day zero for water last year, pretty recently. These are the numbers. So these are numbers come from the International Panel on Climate Change. There are 3 scenarios. These are the numbers that you've seen before over 100 years. This is population. Here are 3 scenarios. It could just zoom up, I mean, without any control at all, or it could level off. You know, the middle one is kind of the most likely, or it could go down. In fact, the rate of population growth is now slowing on its own. One of the most important factors is education of women. So it could come down. This is carbon dioxide. Remember the black line? Zoop, it could go up to some kind of unbelievable sort of 1450, or it could be more reasonable, settling in the 600 parts per million in the atmosphere range, which is also outrageous. Or we could bring it down. And this is the goal. This is what we're hoping for, to bring this down so that we don't bring on catastrophic climate change. Here's temperature. It could go up to 20 degrees, which is just uninhabitable, to a little more moderate. If we're careful, we can hold it to 2 degrees, hopefully to 1.5, but, and here's sea level. They're saying that we always talk about sea level by 2100. It could go up 2 meters at 6 feet is not unlikely. Could go up to 3 meters, sort of median range. Yeah, 1.5 meters, something like that. Or we could hold it down. But this is our future. This will be the most important issue that it is the most important issue that we are facing now, and will define the lives of our children. So my question is, can this view help us to imagine another way to live on the planet? Could we imagine habitat for wildlife? Now, the national parks do this, but could we imagine half of the Earth, or at least half of the Earth, managed to support the largest diversity of wildlife that it possibly can, and to allow those habitats and those animals to move as the climate changes, as they did move during the ice ages? Can we imagine an urban life that is a little denser, and I know there are issues with density, but that incorporates green and that can feed us at the same time? Now, I have colleagues who are totally into robotics and into artificial intelligence and so forth, and I keep thinking, what about robotic gardeners? What about robots that can do all of the tedious, detailed, analytical work and pruning and fertilization and so forth of plants that takes a lot of hand labor and that's very difficult to do now? Our agriculture now has been optimized for tractors, for machines. It's brought us monoculture and things all lined up in rows so that the tractor can get down them. Robots are smarter than that. Artificial intelligence is smarter than that. We can do better. We can grow a huge amount of food on a small parcel of land. Imagine, what if cities incorporated green? This is Miami. Imagining what would happen if the tops of the parking garages supported forests, and what if we had playing fields on the roof, and what if recreation, our parks and our recreational areas were on the roofs of the buildings to make our city, both greener and more inhabitable. And of course, suburban roofs to power much of this. And this picture is real. This is from Germany. They are way ahead of us. They get a credit for solar panels. So these houses, and these are kind of row houses underneath there, they're powering much more than just their own use of power. So my question is, what can each of us do with our skills and our talents to address this crisis? Writers can write, artists can draw. We can all do something that gives us joy and that helps us to face this crisis together. So thank you very much. You can ask questions on the chat. And this is the URL. This is the link for all of this material. So.
Okay. Thank you, Gray. We have already a couple of questions coming in. But please do put your questions on the Q&A section or even on the chat. We're happy to take it either way. So the first question that we have is, how do scientists know what the levels, the temperature and the greenhouse gas levels, and how high or low the sea levels were hundreds of thousands of years ago?
Well, the first and most direct way is that they take cores of ice out of Greenland and Antarctica, and the core, as the snow falls and it turns into ice year after year after year, it traps tiny particles of air that appear as little bubbles in the cores of ice that they drill through the glaciers. And so that they can analyze that air, and they can see pretty directly what is the carbon dioxide content of the air. There's also geological evidence of sea level rise. There's our friend Hal Wanless talks about the coastlines moving, that he is a geologist at University of Miami and one of the founders of CLIO, and he talks about that when the sea level changes, it often has changed in the past rather abruptly, so that the coastline, where the waves, the beaches essentially, suddenly the water just, leaves the beaches behind and climbs inland, and then will, keep moving until it starts to establish another beach further up the slope. So that evidence is in the geological record. There are also what they call proxy measurements. So they can measure temperature by an isotope of oxygen that is trapped in sea sediments. So they're very clever ways that they can understand the climate of the past.
Great, thank you. A participant is asking, how long did it take you to do all this research?
I'm an architect. And, you know, this is sort of an obsession of mine that as I said, I teach history, and the history that I teach, well, you know, in truth, it's modernism, so it's 20th century, but my colleagues teach back to the Greek and to the Egyptian times. But that wasn't nearly far enough back. It wasn't nearly deep enough back to understand climate change. So I started doing some research, just what academics do. And it took a couple of years to, you know, I went back into the scientific literature and really found their review papers. They are papers by pretty prominent scientists that synthesize work that's done by a number of people. So to find those papers and to try and understand them, and my husband's a scientist, which really helps. And then I made use some of their graphics, the charts and graphs to you know, I used their data to make my charts and graphs. And then the pictures I kind of made up from evidence, but they were a lot of fun because I thought it was really, you needed a picture, yeah, to understand kind of where we were.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, as educators, as we are at the Clio Institute, you know, visuals are very important to understand such a complex issue. And as you said it in your introduction, this is it is something invisible. People cannot get their heads around it. It's very abstract in many ways. So we have more questions coming in. Somebody says that you mentioned Chicago. He wanted to know how do you feel this city is already being impacted with climate change?
Absolutely. All cities are being impacted with climate change. Chicago, you know, the farther north you get, the more the temperature swings. That Chicago is hotter in the summer. I mean, it's always been hot in the summer and always been cold in the winter, but it's even hotter in the summer and even colder in the winter. That those Arctic blasts that they talk about that come down and just, you know, they're absolutely frigid, that's climate change. That is because the jet stream that goes around the North Pole has weakened somewhat and has come, that it travels in larger loops, so that some of the Arctic air is coming further south in the winter now than it used to in the past. Mm-hmm. So yes, cities everywhere are impacted now.
Yes. This is an interesting one. So you mentioned that almost a billion years ago, our seas were covered by algae. What relationship do you see between the algal blooms that we've seen around Florida with relations to CO2?
I'm not sure how direct that relationship is. That algae needs nutrients and it needs sunlight. And if you have those conditions, boom, you've got algae. And so the real problem there is that we are, that the fertilizer from the agricultural areas just north of Lake Okeechobee are being released into the lake. And then they cause algae blooms there. And then because of the lake management and the level of the levees and the rainfall, that water full of nutrients is being released out the rivers to the Gulf on one side and to the Atlantic on the other side, and it's just fueling algae blooms. Yeah. The solution to that is for the state to buy the land that they said they were going to buy, 10 years ago, and to use that land as marshland to clean the nutrients. It's also to make the big sugar pay for it, but that's a political.
And I can add to that. There are some scientific studies that link levels of CO2 in the waters in the ocean to algae growth. But particularly, I think the most interesting direct relationship with regards to the climate crisis is the increasing water temperature, which really exacerbate the problem. Okay, there's another question here with regards to cities. So which cities do you think will be the least affected? I guess somebody's looking for a new
safe
home.
haven. Scranton, you know, I don't know. It's that all cities are affected. You know, you think Colorado, heck, that's in the mountains. Colorado's losing its snowpack, so it's losing its water. You think, you know, the Midwest, well, they're getting tornadoes like you wouldn't believe. That there really isn't anywhere safe.
Yeah, no, I always, you know what, we get this question asked a lot, and I always said, you know, we all live under the same roof called an atmosphere, so everybody is going to be impacted by our changing climate. Some people obviously are going to feel it, you know, worse than others, but everybody's going to be impacted.
Yeah.
We have a question says, how long do you think we have to fix this problem?
We got to fix it now, today, right now.
Yes.
We have no time. The planning itself, you know, that takes decades. That, you know, it has to happen now.
Then somebody says, bravo, amazing data, thoughtfully presented. So are you optimistic about our climate future? Why or why not?
To be perfectly honest, no, I'm not optimistic. I like to think that we make our own future, that we make our own luck, and that we can make a good future for ourselves. That takes the will to do it. And it's hard to see that right now. We have an election coming up. What can I say?
Exactly. I would say, yes, it's the time, you know, the most ideal time was yesterday, but the best time is now.
Yes.
Just like the Chinese, yeah, just like the Chinese proverb about, you know, planting a tree. A good question coming. Do you believe it's time for us to seriously begin to invest on CO2 capturing and storage?
I think the best investment is in conservation of energy and clean energy sources. Yes, we will need CO2 capture. We need all of it. But if you have a certain amount of money to spend, you have to think very carefully about where it goes. The thing that has to happen right now is we need to stop burning fossil fuels. We need to stop subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. We need to put a price on carbon. And this is the Citizens Climate Lobby that has a proposal for legislation that would it's called the, I think, Climate Price and Dividend Act. Essentially, it puts a price on carbon and then returns that money to the citizens, to people. So in other words, if you are conserving energy, you actually make money on this deal. If you are using a lot of energy, it encourages you to conserve, and it gives you, you know, it gives you incentive and it gives you some money to do it. So I think that single thing is the best, you know, is the best strategy that we have right now. But essentially, we need all of the above, and we need everyone. That's the thing, is that everyone can do something. And, you know, using your own particular skills, your position, it doesn't take a lot of money. It's available to everyone. I think the people, low-income people in low-income countries are they use less carbon per capita by far than the higher income countries. That simply conservation is probably the best, most immediate strategy. So it's not a question of, well, it's always a question of money, but we need everyone.
Agree. I could not agree more. And I, as we said, you know, it starts with everyone and each of, you know, every one of us We need to be civically engaged. We need to use our superpowers, you know, the power of our voices, the power of our purses, and also the power of our votes. There's not one single solution. There's not a silver bullet, but the good news is there are more than 100 solutions that have been identified to reverse the climate crisis and draw down greenhouse gas levels. The reality is that we need to put a price on pollution. We need to stop subsidizing polluting energy sources. We need to be promoting and investing on clean energy and renewable energy. So, you know, there are many ways that we can start, you know, doing today. And some of these technologies are already used in so many parts of the world. They're you know, the economic and business case have already been settled, but we're lacking will. We're lacking the will of our elected officials and our local, state, and federal governments. But they won't answer to us until we come knocking on their doors and demanding it. So I think with that, we're gonna close today's webinar. I do have one more, not a question, but a compliment that I wanna share from an anonymous attendee who said that wanted to give a compliment to what an amazing presentation, frames climate change over millennia so clearly. Thank you very much for your research and for your work.
Well, thank you.
And with that,
I really appreciate it.
I thank you, Gray, for this wonderful, you know, tool and resources. I mean, this is something that it's available for everybody. You have the website on the chat. Tomorrow, you'll get an email from us also with the link to her website and some additional resources. Any last minutes any last words before we end today's webinar?
I think this coronavirus sort of lockdown is a curious pause. You know, it's a moment when we can reflect and that we can think about what direction do we want to take when we come out of this. It's I mean, in an odd way, it's sort of fortuitous that you get a moment to, it's sort of a reality check, kind of, okay, where are we? What do we want? How are we going to proceed out of this? And maybe going back to kind of normal, that the old normal, or the, you know, the way that we've done things in the past, maybe that's not quite where we want to be in the future. So,
yes,
I mean,
we don't want to go back to normal. We want to go
embrace
to a
it
new
for
normal. Absolutely. Well, again, thank you so very much. It was a great presentation, great information, great questions. You have a lot more compliments on the chat. The last one from Asher, saying that this was one of the best webinars he had ever attended. So,
oh, thank you. Really appreciate that.
We'll share the recording in a follow-up email with some additional resources. And again, thank you so much for attending another of our webinars, and we'll see you real soon in the next one coming up. Please take a look at our calendar events. We have a series of new webinars coming up for the month of May. Dr. Reed, thank you again. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. I really, really appreciate it, Yoka.
You're welcome. Anytime. Bye. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye-bye. Oh, wait a minute. Can we all like turn on our videos or something, or turn on our chat and say, hey?
Yes, I've been trying to do that, but I can't figure out how to do it. So I'm sorry. I will not be able to figure that out. Technology.
Okay, well, I'll do it for everyone then. Yay!
All right. Thank you. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Have a good night. Thank you. Bye-bye.